Chapter 4. Game Rules and Variations. In this section, we're going to be looking at some of the game rules and some of the variations that you might find. First thing you need to know is that Baccarat is one of the easiest casino games to play. There's no decision making on behalf of the player, apart from where to place your bet, and that's out of two choices, player or banker. And the highest you'll ever have to count to is 9. So, let's kick off with the card values. In Baccarat, it's the value of the card that takes centre stage rather than the suit, meaning that hearts, clubs, diamonds and spades have no real relevance in the game. Which is also the same in blackjack, curiously enough. Unless of course you take side bets into consideration, which we're not, because you're playing smart. Unlike blackjack, however, the ace only counts as 1 and not 11. All court cards or picture cards, jacks, queens and kings, and the 10s count as 0. All other cards count as face value. Any total that adds up to 10 or multiples of 10 always reverts back to 0. So if you have a hand of 10 jack queen, for example, that card combination total will be equal to 0. Mixed combinations work in a similar way by dropping the 10 to 0. For example, a combination of 6 followed by 2 8s will give us a total of 22 in the real world, but because we have to drop the 10, we get a game total of 2. If the dealer were to draw another 6 instead of that last 8, then the total will become 20, meaning we'd be back to 0 again. So our total will be 0, or Baccarat to be more correct. Right, so I hope all that made sense. But just to be sure, here are a few card combinations for you to work out. And let's see how many you can get before the answers are revealed. So, how did you do? You may have noticed in that clip that no more than 3 cards are ever used. This is because that's the maximum amount of cards either the player or the banker hand will receive during any coup. The sequence of those cards is known as the tableau, and the tableau is set in stone into the game rules. That means no matter when or where you play, it will always remain the same. Neither dealer nor player has any effect on what the outcome is. As a player, you are advised to learn this tableau because it's important to know where you're putting your money on any game. If you're a dealer, then it's a good idea to pay attention. Now let's take a closer look at the tableau. First, we need to establish that the first card out of the shoe, it always goes to the player. Second to the bank, third to the player, fourth to the bank. Then we stop to calculate the drawing sequence outlined in the tableau. This is what the tableau looks like, and it determines how many cards are to be drawn depending on the player-banker total. Here we have details of what happens with the player hand. Looking at the top row, if the first 2 cards of the player hand have a total of 0, Baccarat, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, the dealer will always draw another card on the player hand, unless of course that is, the banker has a natural 8 or 9. Looking at the second row, the player stands, meaning it does not draw a card, on a 2-card total of 6 or 7, and likewise on the bottom row, where the player has a natural 8 or 9. Now, onto the banker hand. Here it could get a little tricky. The banker receives a third card depending on its total, and also what the player's third card was. Here we see in the top row that the bank always draws a third card if the bank total is 0, Baccarat, 1 or 2, providing that the player does not have a natural 8 or 9. Seems simple enough. Next we see that if the bank has a 3, it always draws a third card unless the player receives an 8 as its third card. Moving down to where the bank has 6, we see that it will only draw another card if the player receives a 6 or a 7, and then stand on anything else. Meaning that if the player receives a 10 or picture card, ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 or 9, the bank stays with its 6. Right, so let's jump in with a quick recap. So what have we learned so far? We've learned that the game consists of 2 hands, the player and the banker, and that we can bet on either. Each round of play is called a coup, and each coup can last anything from a few seconds to 3 or 4 minutes, depending on several factors like the number of players, the size of the bets, the game type, and so on. Our objective is to bet on the hand that we think is going to have the highest total with a minimum of 2 or 3 cards. 9 is the highest total that can be reached, and if the player or the banker's first 2 cards total 8 or 9, this is known as a natural, and it's game over. Naturals are good, of course, providing that's where your money is. You've also learnt that Baccarat is one of the easiest games to play, which is a good thing, of course, because it's good to bet on games that you have a good knowledge of. Okay, so we know what the table looks like and how the layouts are marked up, and we're getting used to some of the terminology that's used. Also, we're getting our head around the tableau, and you have a bit of a backstory going on there too. So well done. However, to understand why this game is so popular and why it's so important that you play it responsibly, we really need to roll our sleeves up, dive in a little bit deeper and look at it in more detail. So, what are your chances? In Baccarat, the banker's hand will win 45.85% of the time, only slightly higher than the player's hand, which is at 44.62%. The tie wins 9.53% of the time, and if we factor out the tie bet altogether, the banker's hand wins about 51% of the time. Once again, the house edge is the percentage of what goes to the house on all casino games. 1.06% on the bank, 1.24% on the player, and 14.3% on the tie bet. A win on the bank pays even money minus 5% commission or tax on traditional Baccarat. A win on the player pays 1-to-1 or even money. A win on the tie bet pays 8-to-1. This means on a 5% game, a wager of 10 minus 5% will give you a payout of 9.5, meaning that the house takes 50 cents of your payout as standard. Likewise, if you bet 100, the house would take 5 on every bank win. There are some variations to the traditional game. The most common is no commission Baccarat. This game usually comes under various guises such as Easy Baccarat, Super 6, or other similar creative variants. These games come with some additional side bets, which we'll cover in the next chapter. Here, the banker payout on no commission Baccarat is dealt with differently. Bets placed on the bank are paid even money without the 5% commission, until, that is, when the bank wins with a 6. When this happens, the bank is paid at odds of 1-to-2. In this case, if you have 100 units, then you will only receive 50, half your original stake. On no commission Baccarat, the house edge remains the same for the player at 1.24%, but increases on the bank from 1.06% to 1.46%. So despite its name, the no commission Baccarat house edge means you're slightly worse off than the traditional 5% commission game. In Baccarat, there are numerous side bets in addition to the player banker bet. These vary from game to game and from place to place. So here are a few of the more common ones that you might find. Player banker pairs. Player banker pairs is one of the more popular side bets and can be found on most, if not all, games throughout the world. Here you can bet on that the player or the banker's hand's first two cards are a pair. A winning pair on either hand pays 11 to 1, and you can bet on both simultaneously, of course, if the mood takes you. The player banker pair's house edge is 10.36%. The best advice anyone could give is just to make sure that the game is using 8 decks of cards when you play. Next up we have Dragon 7 and Panda 8. These can be found on the no commission game, Easy Baccarat. The Dragon 7 bet has a designated betting area for each seated player, and the player may only place the Dragon 7 bet when they have a wager placed on either the player or the banker prior to the initial deal. If the banker hand has a winning point value of 7 using 3 cards, that is, the player's hand has a value of 6 or less, the Dragon bonus bet will win and be paid at odds of 40 to 1. The bet loses with all other outcomes. The house edge on Dragon 7 is 7.61%. As with Dragon 7, Panda 8 will have a designated betting area for all seated players. A player may only place a Panda 8 wager when they have placed another bet on the player or the banker bet prior to the initial deal of cards. If the player hand wins with a point value of 8 with 3 cards, that is, the banker's hand has a value of 7 or less, the Panda 8 bet wins and pays at odds of 25 to 1. The Panda 8 bet loses with all other outcomes. And when there's 8 decks of cards, the Panda 8 carries a house edge of 10.19%. Your Way Égalité. This is a betting sequence licensed by a very reputable casino supplier, and it's a pretty wacky one to say the least. Winning tie bets pop up 9.53% of the time. These tie bets will of course vary in value, anything from 0 to 9. And of course, someone has designed a bet specifically for that too. And here's a chart of the odds. Higher odds, of course, mean that a win is a lot less likely to occur. Think of it of how many times you've won the jackpot on the National Lottery, for example. So, if you like your money to last when playing Baccarat, side bets are best avoided. This leaves us with the tie, or égalité side bet. This bet has been around almost as long as the game itself and has become one of the 3 traditional bets on Baccarat. If the hand ends in a tie between the player and the banker bets, they neither win nor lose, and all winning tie bets are paid at odds of 8 to 1. Some operators allow the tie as a standalone bet, others may insist that you also have to have a bet on the player or the banker, so remember to check with the table staff if you're not sure. If you're playing online, you will come across many other side bets which can be very confusing, and this is not done by accident. Avoid blind betting. Know what you're doing first, and this is crucial to your financial survival, especially when you're playing online. Side bets are not considered to be advantageous to players, so be mindful before entering into that territory.